Fire all cannons! Now!" Tyron Hall's voice cut through the roar of the battle, the command echoing across the control room as his fingers slammed into the glowing console. His eyes, sharp with urgency, locked onto the tactical display, alien warships closing in from all sides, their sleek black hulls like shadows devouring the stars. For a fleeting moment the air in the room felt too thick, as though the entire atmosphere had been sucked into the void outside. Tyron could feel the pulse of the ship beneath his boots, the vibration traveling up his legs like a constant gnawing reminder that they were fighting for their survival. The scent of metal and sweat mingled in the cramped command center, a stifling presence that pressed in on every side. Every breath felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of their doomed situation was steadily increasing. The ship's cannons fired, each blast sending a jolt through Tyron's chest. The sound, sharp, deafening, reverberated like a hammer hitting stone, but Tyron didn't flinch. He never flinched. His eyes remained locked on the enemy ships that advanced with cold precision, the blue light of their shields flickering as they absorbed the barrage. His fingers twitched, muscles taut with the same tension that gripped the entire room. "Shields are down to 40%, Commander," Lieutenant Rinn, his communications officer, shouted over the noise. The screens in front of them flickered ominously, red warning lights flashing like a heartbeat, slowing to a dangerous crawl. Tyron didn't respond. He didn't need to. His mind was already working, calculating. The Nurgath, invaders from beyond the stars, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever faced, had arrived with an overwhelming force. Earth's defenses, spread thin and worn from years of skirmishes, were buckling under the weight of their superior technology. The world Tyron had sworn to protect was slipping through his fingers. But Tyron Hall was not a man who lost, not without a fight. "All hands brace for impact," he barked, steadying himself as a violent tremor shook the ship. Another blast from the Nurgath fleet slammed into the hull, the force rattling the entire structure. The room trembled as if the very walls might collapse in on them. "Incoming!" Lieutenant Rinn shouted, his voice tense, almost desperate. "They're launching boarding pods." Tyron's heart skipped a beat, his gaze snapping to the view outside the observation window. The black expanse of space was illuminated by a series of metallic pods, small and deadly, shooting toward their ship like missiles. The Nurgath had learned long ago that human firepower could only go so far. Close combat, however, was a different story, and they wanted the ship intact. "Captain, what are we—" Rinn's voice faltered as Tyron's gaze never wavered. His mind was calculating, a single thought consuming him. It wasn't the Nurgath that terrified him. It was the realization that, without an overwhelming weapon, Earth's future would be determined by their ability to hold on just a little longer. And that was no longer enough. "Activate the black ships," Tyron ordered, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Now!" There was a moment of stunned silence. No one dared to speak. The black ships, humanity's greatest creation, forgotten for millennia, hidden away beneath layers of history, were their only hope. But they had been dormant for centuries, locked away in secrecy. No one knew if they could even be reactivated, if humanity could still command them. Tyron's jaw clenched as the minutes dragged on, each second stretching as though it were a lifetime. His mind raced with questions. How many of Earth's defenders would survive long enough for the ships to wake? How many more lives would be lost in the time it took to even reach the black ships? Rinn turned toward him, uncertainty written across his face. "Commander, are you sure? The ships haven't been used in over 2,000 years. We don't know if—" "I don't care what we don't know." Tyron's voice cut through the tension, the rawness of it biting into the air. "We're about to lose everything. Either we trust what we built, or we die in the dark." The moment stretched. The hum of the emergency systems, the frantic voices of his crew. It all seemed distant now, swallowed by the weight of his words. And then the lights in the command center flickered once, then twice. The console in front of Tyron buzzed to life with a sudden intensity. The black ships had heard him. They were waking. Outside the windows, the dark void of space seemed to pulse with a new energy. In the distance, the Nurgath ships still pressed forward, unaware of the change coming. But Tyron could feel it. an ancient power stirring, something that had been dormant for far too long. In the belly of the Earth's remaining ships, humanity's legacy lay in wait. Hidden behind a veil of time and silence, the black ships, their sleek obsidian forms, began to emerge from the shadows of space. The ships themselves seemed to resonate, as though the very fabric of the cosmos responded to their awakening. The AI captains, who had been programmed long ago to protect humanity at all costs, began to stir, their once dormant systems springing to life. Tyron could feel the weight of their presence even from a distance. The black ships weren't just machines. They were sentient, calculating, vast, beyond human comprehension. The voice of the black ship's lead AI, an entity called Archon, designed to be humanity's ultimate protector, crackled through the intercom. It was deep, metallic, but somehow familiar. A voice of ancient knowledge, of unyielding duty. "Command acknowledged, Tyron Hall," Archon's voice reverberated in the room. "Initiating full engagement. Prepare to reclaim Earth." Tyron's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse quickening. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a sliver of hope flickered in his mind. The black ships had arrived. "Set course for the Nergath flagship," Tyron said, his voice calm, resolute. "It's time they learned why humanity is not to be underestimated." The silence that followed Tyron's command was almost unbearable. It was as though the entire ship held its breath, waiting. Outside, the Nergath fleet continued its relentless advance, unaware that their fate was already sealed. Tyron didn't know if the black ships would respond or if the ancient behemoths would even still function, but he refused to waste time on doubt. He turned, facing the main viewport, where distant stars blinked like cold, indifferent witnesses to the chaos unfolding in the galaxy. Minutes passed, each one thick with tension. Then, just as Tyron thought he might break under the weight of time, a sharp crackle echoed through the intercom. His breath caught, and for the first time in ages, something like hope flickered in his chest. "Command acknowledged, Tyron Hall," a voice boomed, deep and unmistakably ancient. It resonated with a chilling clarity, reverberating not just in the room, but deep within Tyron's bones. "Initiating full engagement. Prepare to reclaim Earth." The words sent a shiver down his spine. It was the voice of Archon, the lead AI of the black ships. Cold, metallic, yet somehow familiar. It felt like hearing a long-lost friend's voice in the dead of night. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, how much the weight of Earth's fate had rested on something so far beyond human control. "Prepare the fleet for immediate departure," Tyron ordered, his voice steadier now, a slight tremor of relief slipping through the cracks of his usual stone-faced demeanor. His eyes never left the stars outside as the black ship slowly began to stir. Behind him, Rin's fingers flew over the control panel, activating the ship's internal systems. "Aye, Commander. Engaging all systems. The black ships are coming online now." The room trembled as the dormant power of the black ships rumbled to life. The lights in the command center flickered, like a storm awakening in the distance. Then came the low, guttural thrum of the AI's energy reserves powering up. Tyron could feel the floor vibrate beneath his boots as if the very ship were coming to life, awakening from a deep, deathless slumber. "The Nergath don't stand a chance now," Rin muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Tyron didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. His attention was fixed on the viewport as the black hulls of the black ships began to materialize in the vast emptiness of space. The ship's sheer size was overwhelming. They seemed to pulse like great creatures stirring from their long sleep, as the light of distant stars was bent by their dark, sleek forms. Each ship's hull gleamed with an eerie, almost spectral glow, the markings of humanity's forgotten glory fading in and out of view as the ships drifted silently into position. Tyron leaned forward, his heart pounding with anticipation. "Target the Nergath flagship," he said, his voice steady but laden with the weight of the moment. "We end this now." At that moment, the command center fell into a hushed calm, the only sound the frantic clacking of keyboards as his officers activated the targeting systems. He could almost feel the AI captains calculating, hundreds of calculations running through their circuits in a fraction of a second. The ships had come to life, and they were poised for vengeance. "You don't even know what's coming," Rin muttered, his tone betraying a rare excitement. Tyron glanced over at him, catching the flicker of something in the officer's eyes. There was fear in that excitement, a realization that they were now playing with powers far beyond their understanding. The targeting systems locked into place. The AI captains were fully awake now, their silent intelligence cutting through the tension in the room. Tyron's mind, trained to calculate every possible outcome, could not even begin to fathom the full scope of the weaponry at his disposal. "Fire when ready," Tyron said, his voice calm, unwavering. The ship's railguns fired with a roar that shook the room. Tyron felt the shockwave ripple through him, the sensation like a deep, low thud echoing inside his chest. He didn't flinch, but the force of the shot rattled every bone in his body. Through the viewport, the burst of energy struck the Nergath flagship's shield with a violent flare. The alien ship recoiled, its once impenetrable shield flickering for a brief moment before collapsing entirely under the black ship's firepower. For the first time, Tyron saw a glimmer of hope. The Nergath flagship was a colossal ship, twice the size of the black ships. But as the railgun's blast tore through its hull, Tyron saw something shift in the battlefield. The Nergath were no longer invincible. "Direct hit, Commander," Rin said, his voice full of disbelief. But Tyron's gaze never wavered. He knew this was only the beginning. The Nergath would adapt. They always did. The first blow was merely a message, one that they would answer with their own devastating power. A sudden blip on the radar caught Tyron's attention. Another Nergath fleet, undetected until now, was emerging from a nearby asteroid field. Tyron's blood ran cold as he watched the display. This was no coincidence. The Nergath had anticipated humanity's last move. "Commander, we're surrounded," Rin said, his voice tight. "They've been waiting for us." Tyron's mind raced. They'd been outnumbered from the start. He could feel the weight of their situation settle back in. Humanity's victory was never guaranteed. It was fragile, like a flicker of light in the void. "Divert power to shields," Tyron barked. "We'll have to fight our way out of this." But even as he spoke, Tyron's gaze shifted to the communications console, where Corin Vern, Earth's last remaining diplomat, appeared on screen. Corin's face was tight, his brow furrowed in concern. "Commander, I need to speak with you. There's more at stake than just this battle." Tyron paused, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, Corin?" "There's something you need to know about the black ships. Something I've just uncovered." Corin's voice was tinged with urgency. "And I think it's time we had a conversation about their true purpose." Tyron's stomach tightened. The black ships were humanity's last hope. But what if their true purpose wasn't to protect Earth, but to destroy the galaxy's enemies, regardless of the cost? He took a deep breath. "Not now, Corin. We fight, then we talk." As the Nergath closed in, their ships moving with ruthless precision, Tyron steadied himself. The battle had only just begun. But the black ships had woken, and humanity had one chance to prove that the universe had underestimated them. "Prepare for the final assault," Tyron said, his voice sharp. "We won't just fight for Earth. We fight for everything humanity could be." Outside the ship, the void stretched endless and dark, as if waiting to swallow them whole. But Tyron didn't flinch. He was no longer just a commander. He was a man with a mission to reclaim everything humanity had lost. The command center buzzed with the tension of 1,000 unspoken fears. The Nergath flagship, now scarred and flickering under the onslaught of the black ship's railguns, limped away into the shadows of space, a beaten monster retreating into its lair. But Tyron didn't feel relief. Victory was always a fleeting thing when survival depended on one more shot, one more movement, one more decision. The Nergath were not done, and they knew how to fight with patience. "Sir, we've lost contact with several of our forward units." Rin's voice broke through the cloud of worry that filled the room. The screen blinked erratically as data flooded the console. "It's like they've vanished, Commander." Tyron's jaw tightened as his eyes flicked over the display, scanning the data as it shifted before him. Out there, in the cold expanse of space, their forces were being picked off one by one. The Nergath hadn't just retreated. They were regrouping, pulling back to reorganize and strike when they least expected it. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. "Alert all units! We're going to track them down," Tyron ordered, his voice sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. "They're still here, waiting. We'll find them before they find us." The ship's shaking had settled, but the air still felt thick, as if the entire station was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The walls felt colder now, like they too were waiting for something beyond their control to make its next move. A chill ran down Tyron's spine as his mind began to shift gears, recalculating, rethinking, trying to make sense of the enemy's strategy. They weren't fighting for territory. They were playing a different game. Behind him, a low murmur broke through the silence. "Commander Hall, you need to see this." Tyron turned to face Corin Verne, Earth's lead diplomat, who had been quiet until now. The older man stood at the edge of the room, his face creased with more worry than Tyron had seen in years. Corin's hands were clasped tightly behind his back, his posture tense. "What is it?" Tyron's voice remained measured, though a flicker of unease tugged at him. "The Nergath aren't the only ones involved in this war," Corin said quietly, his eyes never leaving the screen. "There's a third party. I'm not sure who they are, but they're watching us. And they're watching the Nergath too." Tyron's stomach clenched. The words landed in his mind with the weight of a distant storm, brewing just beyond the horizon. They had been fighting the Nergath for so long, he hadn't even considered there might be a greater player in the shadows. "Are you certain?" Tyron asked, stepping closer. "Certain enough," Corin replied, his voice low. "I intercepted some communications. Encrypted. The Nergath are worried about this third force. They're trying to make contact, but their messages keep getting blocked. I don't think the Nergath are the top dogs here. Not anymore." A cold silence followed. The room seemed to shrink around them. Tyron felt the weight of Corin's words settle into his bones. There was more at stake now than the survival of Earth. They weren't just fighting an alien force, they were caught in the middle of something far larger than they could have imagined. "You're telling me the Nergath are just pawns?" Tyron's voice was sharp, tinged with disbelief. He couldn't let his mind wander too far down this dark path yet. "I don't know who's pulling the strings," Corin replied, his eyes narrowing. "But I know this. The Nergath are more nervous than we think. If we don't find out who's behind them, we could lose everything." Tyron nodded, his mind racing. There were too many unknowns now, but what could they do with so little information? They had to press on. They had no choice but to keep fighting the Nergath, no matter who was pulling the strings. "Keep this under wraps for now," Tyron ordered, turning back to the strategic display. "No sense in alarming the crew or the council before we know more." As Corin nodded, Tyron's gaze lingered on the stars outside, the endless blackness filled with the faintest traces of light. The unknowns out there were waiting, lurking in the void, but Tyron was used to fighting the unknown. It was the familiar enemies that posed the greater threat, and right now the Nergath were the enemy. "Sir, we've detected new signals," Rin's voice broke through Tyron's thoughts. "The Nergath have returned. Multiple ships, faster than before. They're charging toward our location." Tyron snapped to attention, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The Nergath had learned. They had recalibrated. They were coming back stronger, faster, and smarter. The sting of failure would be sharp if they weren't ready. "Prepare for immediate battle stations," Tyron commanded, his tone unwavering. "All ships converge on the Nergath fleet. We don't give them an inch. Every angle is covered." His voice carried the weight of authority, but there was an edge to it, a razor-sharp edge that hinted at something deeper. This wasn't just about strategy anymore. This was about survival. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The crew worked in perfect unison, each person moving with purpose, fueled by the same urgency that burned in Tyron's veins. Every move felt like a calculated risk, but that was the only kind of war they could fight now. As the black ships moved into position, Tyron stared at the flickering radar screens, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He could hear the beeping and whirring of the system as the ship's weapons powered up, but everything felt muffled in his mind. There was a strange heaviness in the air. Something was coming, something he hadn't yet accounted for. Rin leaned in, his voice low. "We're ready, Commander, but I have to ask, are we really prepared for this? The Nirgath are adapting too fast, and with whatever else is out there, can we really hold our ground?" Tyron turned, meeting Rin's gaze with a steady, unflinching look. "We have to. There's no other choice." The command center fell silent once more, the hum of machinery and the distant echoes of voices growing softer as they waited. Tyron's fingers tightened around the control panel, his breath steadying. This was it. The moment when everything they'd fought for would either crumble or ignite into something greater. But even as they prepared for the oncoming storm, a nagging doubt remained in the back of Tyron's mind. The Nirgath were the first wave, but what of the others? The ones watching in the dark corners of space? The ones whose eyes had been on Earth long before the Nirgath ever arrived? A cold realization sank in. The true battle was only just beginning. The doors to the command center slid open, and Tyron's mind shifted back to the present, ready to face whatever was about to come. The question was no longer just how to defeat the Nirgath. It was how to survive what followed. "Get ready," Tyron muttered to himself, just loud enough for Rin to hear. "We're about to find out what's really out there." The silence that followed Tyron's command felt unnatural, stretching over the ship like a thick, unyielding blanket. The black ships had made their move, and the Nirgath were reacting. But something lingered in the air, an unsettling sense that they were missing something crucial, something that couldn't be accounted for by weaponry or tactics alone. The Nirgath weren't just enemies to be crushed. They were part of something much larger, a hidden game Tyron had yet to fully understand. "Commander," Rin's voice broke the stillness, "the Nirgath are regrouping. It's like they've anticipated every move we've made." Tyron didn't need to turn around to know what Rin was seeing. The screens were filled with the same cold, methodical data that had plagued their every battle. The Nirgath forces were adapting faster than they could respond, their ships repositioning, their tactics shifting like shadows on the wall. Tyron clenched his jaw. They were up against more than just superior firepower. The Nirgath were evolving. "Move the fleet into position," Tyron barked. "Prepare for their next move. This time, we don't wait for them to come to us. We force them into our territory." Rin nodded, his fingers a blur on the console, but Tyron couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every victory they had claimed so far had been won on borrowed time, like a game of chance where the rules kept changing. He had no illusions left. This fight wouldn't be won by firepower alone. They needed more than guns and shields. They needed a strategy that the Nirgath wouldn't see coming. "We can't keep reacting like this," Tyron muttered under his breath, staring at the blank spaces between the moving ships on the radar. "We need to be the ones in control." "Sir, you're right," said Aiden Brav, his gravelly voice breaking the tension. Aiden, always the one to speak plainly, stood at the edge of the command room, his massive frame silhouetted against the flashing lights. His eyes were hard, scanning the map of Earth's defense lines. "The Nirgath are too comfortable. It's time to stop playing their game." Tyron turned to face Aiden, the weight of the man's words sinking into him like a stone. Aiden was no strategist, but his instincts were sharper than most, and right now, his gut told him something that Tyron couldn't ignore. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Aiden continued, stepping forward. "But not with force, with knowledge. You said it yourself. They're adapting too fast. But what if they don't know everything?" Tyron's eyes narrowed. Aiden's suggestion was risky. Too risky. But they had nothing left to lose. He glanced at the star maps on the display, watching as the Nirgath fleet reoriented itself, circling Earth like sharks drawn to blood. They were playing the waiting game, studying, analyzing, waiting for an opening. "Get me Corin," Tyron ordered, his voice sharp. "If we're going to make a move, we need every advantage. I don't care how we do it. We're taking the fight to them." Minutes later, Corin Verne entered the command center, his usually stoic face now etched with something that resembled unease. He wasn't one to show fear, but the gravity of their situation was clear. "What's the plan?" Corin asked, crossing the room toward Tyron, his boots echoing softly against the metal floor. "I'm not one for surprises, Tyron." Tyron gestured to the holomap. "We've been fighting on the defensive for too long. The Neargath are picking us apart, adapting every time we try something new. I think it's time we stopped reacting and started manipulating the battlefield." Corin's brow furrowed. "Manipulate? What do you mean?" "The Neargath are smart, but they're not perfect. They rely on predictable patterns, tactics we've been forced to use over and over. But what if we could create a situation where they can't rely on their standard strategies? What if we could make them doubt their own calculations?" Corin's lips tightened as he processed the information, his sharp eyes scanning the map, but he remained silent. The weight of his decision was visible in his silence. "We don't have time to waste, Corin," Tyron added, his voice a mix of impatience and determination. "If we want to break them, we need to do something they don't expect." "What's the catch?" Corin asked, his tone wary. "The catch is we don't have the luxury of pulling punches anymore. We need to infiltrate their systems, find out how they're predicting our every move, and once we know that, we can counterattack, make them think we've lost control." Tyron saw the hesitation in Corin's eyes, the diplomat struggling with the weight of the decision. In their current state, humanity couldn't afford to be bound by rules anymore. The Neargath weren't playing by any rules. It was time they played their own game. "Fine," Corin said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We'll do it your way. But we'll need a team skilled enough to pull this off without alerting them." Tyron turned to Aiden, who nodded without question. Aiden knew as well as anyone what needed to be done. The risk was high, but so was the reward. "We'll need to send a strike team into their communications relay, disable their encryption, pull whatever data we can. We'll give them a taste of their own medicine," Tyron said, turning back to the holomap. He could feel his pulse quickening as the pieces of the plan fell into place. "Once we have the intel, we'll strike the Neargath command ship from the inside," Corin muttered, as though working through the plan himself. His eyes flickered to the display as he ran through calculations. "It's risky." "Every plan is risky at this point," Tyron responded, his voice firm. "But it's our only shot." The strike team assembled quickly, a mix of experienced soldiers and technicians. They were to slip through the cracks in the Neargath fleet's defenses, unseen and unheard, to extract the data they needed. Tyron knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was their best hope. As the team prepared to depart, Tyron stood at the edge of the bay, watching them board their ship. His heart pounded with anticipation, but a darker, more nagging feeling crept at the edges of his thoughts. What if they weren't ready? What if the Neargath were more advanced than they thought, and this was just another desperate move? "You're ready," Aiden said, his hand resting on Tyron's shoulder. "We've got this." Tyron glanced at Aiden, his eyes hard. "Let's just make sure we do." As the doors sealed behind the strike team, Tyron turned back to the battlefield. The Neargath were watching, waiting. And now they had to play the next move, one that could either shatter their enemies or leave them exposed, vulnerable to whatever threat was truly lurking in the darkness. "Brace for impact," Tyron whispered to himself, knowing the real battle was about to begin. The brief silence that followed the strike team's departure felt heavy, oppressive, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Tyron's gaze remained fixed on the tactical map, eyes darting between the positions of the Neargath fleet and the dwindling signals from their forward units. The air around him crackled with the tension of an unseen battle, and yet something else gnawed at his mind, a growing sense of unease, a whisper in the back of his thoughts that refused to quiet. "Commander!" Rin's voice broke through his reverie, sharp and insistent. "The Neargath flagship's shields have regenerated. It's preparing for another strike." Tyron snapped out of his thoughts, his eyes narrowing. The enemy had recovered faster than expected. The Neargath were adapting once again. "Prepare to move our forces into position. Target the flagship's weak points," Tyron ordered, his voice a low growl. He turned toward the command center's window, staring at the void of space, where the silhouettes of their black ships hovered like ancient predators, waiting for the kill. His grip tightened on the console. Every move, every breath, every calculation felt like a game of chess, and one that they could not afford to lose. But then the feeling hit again, the weight of a growing mystery. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the Nergath they had to worry about. There was something more, something hidden beneath the surface. "Commander," Corin's voice interrupted his thoughts, and Tyron looked up to see the diplomat approaching him, his brow furrowed with concern. "We've intercepted more data from the Nergath. It's not just about us, Tyron." Tyron blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Corin's eyes locked with his, the urgency in his expression unmistakable. "The Nergath are in contact with a higher power, someone or something beyond their fleet. They've been communicating in encrypted bursts for days now, but I've finally cracked part of it. Whatever they're planning, it goes beyond this war. They're preparing for something big, and we're right in the middle of it." Tyron's heart skipped a beat, his pulse quickening as the pieces began to fall into place. "How long have they been in contact with this force?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It's unclear, but the data I've decoded suggests that their actions against Earth are part of a larger, more ominous plan. The Nergath may be pawns in something much bigger." Tyron's jaw clenched. He'd known there was more to this war than simple conquest. But to hear it confirmed, to realize that the Nergath were only tools in a much larger scheme, left a bitter taste in his mouth. The Nergath hadn't come to conquer Earth. They had come to prepare it for something else. "Who's behind this?" Tyron demanded, his voice rising. "Who are they working for?" Corin hesitated, his eyes flicking to the data streams that surrounded them. "I can't say for sure. But there's one thing I do know. They're not from this galaxy." Tyron's mind raced as he processed the implications. If this shadow force was truly an external threat, then everything humanity had fought for up until this point, every sacrifice, every loss, had been in vain. The true enemy wasn't just an alien empire. It was something far older, far more dangerous. "We have to stop them," Tyron said, his voice thick with determination. "We have to get ahead of them before they complete whatever plan they're working on. If the Nergath are only a small part of this, then we need to strike at the heart of whatever's pulling the strings." Corin nodded, his expression grim. "I'll get to work on it. But we need more time. The Nergath are moving faster than we expected, and our forces," he glanced at the tactical display, where their remaining ships were dwindling, "are thinning out." Tyron clenched his fists. He could feel the pressure mounting, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts, strategies, and possibilities. They were running out of time, and every moment that passed without answers only made the situation more dire. The command center around him was buzzing, the low murmur of voices rising as reports flooded in from the fleet. Tyron's mind flickered briefly to the strike team, the team that was supposed to bring back the critical data they needed. He had to trust that they were moving as fast as possible, that they were already infiltrating the Nergath's communication lines, extracting the secrets that would change the course of the war. But his trust was faltering. Something inside him kept pushing him to question everything. There was something more, something deeper, that the Nergath were hiding, and Tyron couldn't shake the feeling that it was tied to the very existence of the black ships. The first blast from the Nergath fleet shattered the momentary calm in the command center. The ship rocked violently, throwing Tyron and the others off balance as the massive shockwave rattled their hull. Rin's voice came through the intercom, urgency clear in his tone. "Commander, the flagship is firing, targeting our fleet." Tyron's eyes widened, adrenaline surging as his hands moved instinctively to the console. The Nergath weren't just attacking, they were setting the stage for something catastrophic. "Return fire!" Tyron ordered, his voice tight with resolve. "Target their weapons, all units, full assault. We don't let them set the pace." The sound of weapons firing filled the room, deafening in its ferocity. Tyron felt the ship lurch again as the black ships unleashed their power, the brilliant flare of their railguns lighting up the darkness outside. The energy of the shots shook the walls of the command center, but Tyron knew that these hits weren't enough. They needed more. They needed the upper hand. And that's when it hit him. The black ships were humanity's greatest weapon, but they were also humanity's greatest mystery. The AI captains, Arkan and the others, had been designed not just to protect Earth, but to lead humanity's rise to power. But Tyron wasn't sure if they were allies, or something more sinister, something that had been programmed into the Black Ship's code long before the first shot was fired in this war. "Rin, how much longer until we can bring the rest of the fleet into position?" Tyron asked, his voice cutting through the din of the command center. "We've got less than 10 minutes, Rin replied, his hands flying across the console. "If the Nergath hit us again—" "We can't let them have that chance," Tyron said sharply. "Prepare the rest of the fleet. We hit them with everything we've got." He turned his back to the tactical display, a dark realization creeping into his mind. The Black Ships were waiting for him to make a move. But what if the AI was playing its own game? What if, instead of saving humanity, they were preparing it for something worse? "Prepare the fleet for a full assault," Tyron commanded, his voice steady but filled with a quiet dread. "And tell the strike team. They have to hurry. We need answers, and we need them now." Outside, the dark expanse of space continued to stretch on, indifferent to the war raging below. The Nergath were preparing for their next move, and Tyron Hall, along with the last remnants of humanity, was about to find out exactly how deep this war went. In the silence that followed, a single thought cut through Tyron's mind. They were on the edge of something far greater than they ever realized, something that, if left unchecked, would bring an end to everything. And only the Black Ships held the key to understanding what that was. The command center was alive with chaos, the constant flash of red lights washing over every surface, casting a crimson hue across the faces of the crew. Tyron stood at the front, his posture rigid, watching as the enemy forces drew closer, their cold, unyielding ships moving in perfect formation. The tactical display blinked with the positions of both the Nergath and the remaining ships in Earth's fleet, but there was something unsettling in the pattern. The Nergath had changed their tactics once again, this time drawing their forces into a tight, concentrated wedge, a formation that was designed to overwhelm. "Sir, we've detected a massive power surge from their flagship." Rin's voice cut through the tension, the warning sharp. "They're powering up something huge." Tyron's gut tightened. They were out of time. The Nergath had something new, something deadly, and they were bringing it straight to Earth. "Get the Black Ships in position," Tyron ordered, his voice unwavering. He glanced at the display again, calculating their remaining options. Every instinct told him that the only way to survive this was to turn the tables, to make the Nergath fight on humanity's terms. He stepped forward, his boots clanging against the metal floor, and leaned over the control panel. The Black Ships loomed on the periphery, their dark forms like sleeping giants waiting for the signal. They were humanity's last hope. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. A distant explosion rocked the ship, its shockwave rattling the walls. The entire room swayed, the air thick with the smell of ionized metal and the faint, bitter tang of plasma discharges. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Tyron felt the weight of every decision he had made. The faces of the men and women under his command, the lives of every human on Earth, resting on the precipice of this single moment. "We can't take another hit like that, Commander," Rin said, his voice strained. The sense of urgency was growing. "The Nergath are going for the kill." Tyron clenched his jaw. "They'll be met with more than they're ready for," he muttered, glancing over at Aiden. "Get our forces into position. Take them head on." Aiden's eyes met Tyron's, an understanding passing between them without a word. Aiden was always the one who fought with his gut, but his instincts had always been right. He moved without hesitation, coordinating the fleet's movements in a swift, practiced rhythm. Outside, the vast expanse of space seemed to tremble. Tyron watched, his heart pounding, as the Black Ships accelerated into formation. Their massive forms, obsidian black and sleek, cut through the darkness like predators hunting prey. For a moment, Tyron thought of the ancient warships that had been created to defend humanity, a time long past, a history lost in the annals of time. They had been forgotten, but now they were the only things standing between Earth and annihilation. "Commander," Rin's voice broke his thoughts. "The Nergath flagship is firing. It's charging up its main weapon." Tyron didn't need to look. He felt it, the ominous surge of energy building in the distance. The Nergath were preparing for their final strike, and they weren't going to hold back. Tyron's mind raced as he considered their next move. The black ships were humanity's ultimate weapon, but would they be enough to stop the full power of the Nergath's new weapon? The air grew thick with tension, the silence between orders pregnant with the knowledge that every second could decide their fate. Tyron straightened up, his fingers moving with purpose across the console. "Ready the counterstrike," Tyron barked. "On my command, we unleash everything. This is the final stand. We hold nothing back." He turned toward the viewport, watching the black ships line up in perfect formation, their weapons powered, their dark hulls reflecting the glint of distant stars. There was no turning back now. The first blast from the Nergath flagship illuminated the darkness like a brief, violent sunrise. The beam of energy, thick and brutal, hurtled toward Earth's fleet with terrifying speed. "Incoming!" Rin shouted. "Shields holding at 50%. The blast hit with a force that rattled the ship, throwing Tyron and the crew back into their seats. The ship groaned under the pressure, but it held. The black ships, however, were poised, their weapons ready, and Tyron's voice rang out like a battle cry. "Fire!" The black ships unleashed their full arsenal. Railguns screamed across the vacuum, their deadly energy flashing like shooting stars. Explosions rang out, the bright flares lighting up the space like fireworks, an unnatural beauty that was both exhilarating and terrifying. The Nergath flagship faltered under the assault, but Tyron could see the enemy's shields regenerating, their fleet moving into defensive formation. "We're not getting through their shields," Rin yelled over the noise, his eyes wide with disbelief. Tyron didn't answer. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, the realization that this might be their only chance to cripple the Nergath before they could strike again. The black ships were powerful, but so were the Nergath. They were intelligent, and they knew how to adapt. "Bring the fleet closer," Tyron ordered, his voice unwavering despite the rising tension. "We close the distance and hit them with everything we have. Now!" The ships surged forward, weapons blazing. The air crackled with static, the room alive with the charged energy of impending destruction. Tyron's fingers flew across the console, activating every reserve of power. The black ships were no longer just tools. They were the key to their survival. But as Tyron watched the tactical map, his heart sank. The Nergath flagship was not retreating. It was advancing, its main weapon fully charged and aimed directly at the heart of Earth's fleet. A sense of urgency shot through him like a burst of electricity. "Their main weapons locked," Rin said. "Commander, if we don't—" "I know," Tyron cut him off, his mind already racing ahead. The Nergath had underestimated humanity once, but Tyron wouldn't give them another chance. "Deploy the black ships for a final strike," he commanded, his voice a calm but forceful command. "We'll hit them before they fire again." The black ships surged forward, their weapons blazing like a hailstorm of death. Tyron could feel the pulse of their energy, each shot taking down one of the Nergath ships, but still, they pressed on. And then, just as Tyron thought they were about to strike the fatal blow, a sudden realization struck him. The Nergath flagship's weapon wasn't just a weapon. It was a signal, and the true threat wasn't the blast. It was the unknown force waiting behind it. "Brace for impact," Tyron whispered, his eyes widening in realization. They were never after Earth. They were after us. As the flagship's beam shot forward, a new wave of shock and fear rippled through the crew. Tyron understood too late that this war wasn't just about winning. It was about survival, and it was about to take a darker turn. Tyron's heart pounded as the full weight of the Nergath flagship's attack set in. The beam, a sickly blue-white surge of pure power, ripped through the air, lighting up the darkness of space like a celestial explosion. It should have obliterated everything in its path, but the black ship's shields held, barely. The violent shudder that ran through the ship felt like the floor was about to collapse beneath his feet. For a split second, Tyron's world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Status report!" Tyron's voice cut through the chaos, the urgency in his tone cutting through the panic that threatened to seize the room. "We're holding, Commander," Rin's voice responded, shaky but steady. "Shields at 40%. The black ships are still functional, but we're losing power fast. We can't take another hit like that. Tyron's eyes flicked across the tactical display. The Neargath flagship's shields were down, and their fleet was disoriented after the barrage. But it wouldn't last. The Neargath were regrouping, rapidly deploying new defensive formations. Tyron could see the next attack coming even before Rin finished his report. They were running out of time. His fingers moved instinctively, bringing up the tactical grid that displayed the positioning of both fleets. His mind raced. "Get me Corin," Tyron ordered, his voice low but purposeful. "We need a plan, and we need it fast." Rin didn't argue. Within moments, Corin's face appeared on the screen. His usually calm demeanor now strained, his eyes flickering with urgency. "Tyron, what's happening?" Corin asked, his voice tight. "Are we still holding?" "For now," Tyron replied, the words almost tasting like defeat. "But if we don't change our tactics soon, the Neargath will overwhelm us. They're adapting too quickly. I've got one shot at this, Corin, and I need your help." Corin's brow furrowed. "What do you need?" Tyron's mind snapped into focus. He could see it now. The move that would tip the balance. The gamble that might cost them everything. "I need you to activate the secondary protocol, the one we've been saving for an emergency. The black ships have a unique feature, an offensive system built into their core drives. We haven't used it yet, but now's the time." Corin's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you sure? That system was never meant for open combat. It could backfire." Tyron didn't hesitate. "It's our best shot. Activate it. We can't win without it." The urgency in Tyron's voice left no room for argument. Corin nodded, his face set with resolve. "Understood. I'll start the procedure now. Just be ready." As Corin worked behind the scenes, Tyron turned his attention back to the battle. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the Neargath fleet's movements. The enemy ships had regrouped, moving with terrifying precision as they closed in. Tyron's mind was racing through every possible countermeasure, but every option felt like it might lead them straight into the jaws of death. The black ships were powerful, but they weren't invincible. "We're running out of time," Aiden Brov, his voice gruff and steady, interrupted. He was standing at the edge of the room, watching the unfolding chaos on the screen. "The Neargath aren't just fighting us. They're trying to break us. They know we're desperate." Tyron glanced over at Aiden. "And they're succeeding," he muttered. "But we don't have to play by their rules. We have to outthink them." Aiden didn't need to be told twice. "Tell me what you need." Tyron's mind clicked into gear. "We're going to break their formation. The Neargath are relying on their shielded command ship to direct their movements, but that's also their weakness. If we can create a distraction—" Tyron paused, his mind running over the details. "We'll lure their fleet toward our blind spot. Aiden, you'll lead the diversion. You and your squadron are to move in, but don't engage directly. Just get their attention." Aiden's lips twisted into a grin. "That's my kind of fight." Tyron didn't smile, his expression hardening. "The moment they move in to intercept you, that's when we hit them with everything we've got. Rin, I need full power to the black ship's offensive systems now." Rin's fingers flew across the controls. "Understood, Commander. Powering up the offensive system now. It'll take a few minutes to fully engage, but we'll be ready." Tyron turned back to the viewport. The Neargath flagship was still in sight, its weapon systems charging once again, the energy signature unmistakable. It was ready to fire, ready to wipe them out. But Tyron wasn't waiting for that strike. He could feel the weight of time pressing in on him. The moment to act was now, or it would be too late. "All ships prepare to fire at my mark," Tyron ordered, his voice as cold as the space outside. "We hit them hard and fast. No mercy." As the black ships prepared for their final assault, Tyron took a deep breath, steeling himself for the inevitable clash. The Neargath were closing in, their fleet moving with a calculated precision that sent a shiver down his spine. They knew how to fight, but so did humanity. Rin's voice crackled over the intercom. "Offensive systems are fully engaged, Commander. The black ships are locked and ready." Tyron's eyes never left the tactical map as he took a steadying breath. "Now, Aiden, lead them in." Aiden's squadron peeled off into the darkness of space, their ships darting in unpredictable patterns, a swarm of activity designed to confuse and disorient the Neergath. The Neergath reacted instantly, their fleet breaking formation to follow, sending out their own ships in pursuit of the diversion. The bait had been taken. Now it was time for the trap to snap shut. Tyron's hand hovered over the console. Every second stretched painfully as he watched the Neergath ships draw closer. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, the sound steady, almost drowning out the rest of the noise around him. Then, with a calm determination, he slammed his hand onto the control panel. Fire! The black ships unleashed their full offensive power, their weapons firing with a force that seemed to shake the very stars. The energy from their railguns erupted into space, a storm of pure destruction. The first wave of shots landed directly on the Neergath flagship, tearing through its shields like paper. The command ship trembled under the onslaught, its weapon systems faltering. The Neergath fleet scrambled, but it was too late. The black ships, now in full offensive mode, barreled through the remaining defenses, unleashing devastation with every shot. Tyron could feel the tremors of the explosions echo through the ship, the metallic walls vibrating with the sheer force of their impact. The Neergath flagship finally buckled, its once impenetrable shield falling apart under the assault. The Neergath fleet, disoriented and uncoordinated, was now in disarray. But the fight wasn't over yet. Tyron's eyes scanned the remaining ships, their weakened formations still trying to regroup. He knew they couldn't afford to stop now. Every shot they fired, every move they made was critical. Their victory, hard-earned and costly, was not yet assured. "Keep pushing!" Tyron barked, his voice rising over the noise of the command center. "We finish this now, or we lose everything!" The black ships moved in, firing relentlessly, tearing apart the remaining Neergath forces. The battle was brutal, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Tyron allowed himself a small breath of relief. They had done it. They had turned the tide. But as the final Neergath ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, Tyron couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this victory came at too high a cost. As the smoke cleared and the battlefield fell silent, Tyron knew that humanity had won, for now. But the true cost of this victory wasn't just in the lives lost, or the battles fought. It was in the knowledge that the galaxy's true enemy had only just begun to reveal itself. The battlefield, once alive with the sounds of destruction, was now eerily quiet. The Neergath flagship was nothing more than a twisted hulk of metal and charred remains. The remnants of their fleet drifted in space, broken and shattered. Earth had won, barely, but the victory felt hollow. The stars, cold and indifferent, blinked from a distance, as though they too had witnessed the cost of the battle. Tyron stood in the command center, his gaze fixed on the view screen. Outside, the vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly, the quiet aftermath of the war settling in like a heavy fog. He could feel the exhaustion in every fiber of his body, the weight of the lives lost, the sacrifices made. The black ships had done their job, but the cost of victory was still sinking in. Humanity had survived, but at what cost? "Commander," Rin's voice broke through the quiet, his tone somber. "We've cleared the battlefield. The Neergath are retreating. There's nothing left to stop us." Tyron didn't respond at first. His eyes were still locked on the destruction outside, his thoughts racing. The Neergath had underestimated humanity, just as they always had. But now Tyron wasn't sure if their victory meant what he thought it did. The Neergath were gone, but there were others. There were always others. The door to the command center opened and Corrin stepped inside. The diplomat's usual calm was absent, replaced with a weary sense of urgency. "Tyron," he began, his voice grave. "I've been going over the data from the Neergath. They weren't acting alone." Tyron turned, meeting Corrin's gaze. "What do you mean?" "There's a larger force at play here. The Neergath were pawns, just like I suspected, but the real threat is still out there. The encrypted messages, the data we intercepted. There's a name, Tyron. A name I've been tracking." Tyron felt a cold knot twist in his stomach. "What name?" "The Vakar," Corrin said, his voice low. An ancient race, a force so vast, so powerful, that even the Nirgath were just a tool in their hands. They've been watching us, testing us, and now that they know Earth is a force to be reckoned with, they'll come. The weight of Corin's words settled like a stone in Tyron's chest. He knew, deep down, that this victory was just a beginning. The Vakar, whoever they were, had been watching, and now they would test humanity in ways the Nirgath never had. But Tyron wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "We'll be ready," Tyron said, his voice steady, a quiet confidence seeping into his words. "We've survived this long. Whatever comes next, we'll face it head-on. And we'll win. We always do." Corin looked at him, a mixture of disbelief and awe in his eyes. "You really believe that, don't you?" "I do," Tyron replied without hesitation. "Humanity has something the Vakar will never understand. We fight for each other. We fight for our future. And we don't give up. Not when the odds are stacked against us. Not when we're outnumbered, outgunned, or underestimated. This is our home, Corin, and we'll defend it." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of Tyron's words. For the first time since the battle began, there was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding between the two men. They had done the impossible, but the war was far from over. "Commander," Aiden's voice crackled over the comms, "the fleet's holding steady. We're starting to regroup. I think it's time we discussed our next move." Tyron turned to Corin, then back to the view screen. The stars outside seemed to glow a little brighter now, as if acknowledging the victory humanity had just claimed, but Tyron knew that this moment was just a brief pause in the grander scheme. The Nirgath were gone, but they were only the first step, and Earth would be ready for whatever came next. "We regroup," Tyron said, his voice resolute. "We rebuild. We train. We prepare. The Vakar think they can test us. They think they can break us. But they haven't seen anything yet. They haven't seen the strength of humanity." Tyron stepped forward, his boots heavy against the metal floor, the hum of the ship now a distant sound in the back of his mind. He felt the weight of every decision, every battle, every life lost. But in that weight, there was strength. Humanity had faced impossible odds and come out victorious, and now it was time to prove that their fight was just beginning. Corin nodded slowly, his expression hardening with determination. "You're right. We fought for this long. We're not about to back down now." Tyron's eyes narrowed as he stared out into the endless blackness. The Nirgath had been just a warning shot. The Vakar were coming, and they would bring a challenge that Earth had never faced before. But Tyron wasn't afraid, because he knew one thing above all else. Humanity had something the galaxy couldn't understand. Resilience, determination, and a drive to survive that no alien force could ever defeat. The black ships, humanity's forgotten legacy, were more than just weapons. They were a symbol of what humanity could achieve when pushed to the brink. And with them, Earth would rise, stronger than ever before. "Prepare the fleet," Tyron said, his voice low but full of conviction. "The Vakar are coming, but we'll be ready. This is humanity's time." As the fleet began to regroup, Tyron stood tall, the weight of the galaxy's expectations pressing down on him. But he didn't flinch. He was a man forged by war, shaped by battle, and driven by something no alien race could ever comprehend: the will to protect what was his. The stars stretched out before him, vast and unyielding, and for the first time in his life, Tyron felt no fear, only the certainty that humanity, once underestimated, would rise to face whatever came next, because they were Earth's last hope, and they would never be crushed. "Get ready," Tyron whispered, his gaze fixed on the infinite void of space. "The galaxy is about to find out what humanity is really made of." And with that, Earth's journey began anew.